If you ever feel out of control around food, you're not alone, and you're in the right place to learn practical, no-nonsense information about why you binge and how to stop. Binge eating does not mean that something is wrong with you. It's a natural but primitive brain response that you can correct. If you're ready for change, sign up for the Brain Over Binge self-paced online course for less than $20 per month. And if you feel you need personalized support, we also offer one-on-one coaching and group coaching. To learn more, go to brainoverbinge.com/subscribe. And I hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to the Brain Over Binge podcast, where you learn a simple, brain-based approach to ending binge eating. I'm Kathryn Hansen, your host, and for those of you who are new here, I'm the author of Brain Over Binge and the Brain Over Binge Recovery Guide. And you can always find links to both of those books in the show description. They're available in paperback and ebook and audiobook as well. Today I'm just going to share some insights with you. And these insights are based around two different expressions that are pretty common expressions that I've been thinking about lately. With the work that I do, I often hear things out in the world or see things, and it sparks ideas for me. And a lot of times I want to bring that back to you on the podcast. So that's what I'm going to be doing today. The first expression is two wrongs don't make a right. And this was something that I remember my softball coach in high school saying a lot. I can vividly remember her saying this, and she would say it when someone would make a mistake and then follow that with another mistake. Let's say you miss a ball in the outfield, you miss a catch, and then you get frustrated and you pick the ball up and you make a terrible throw and should yell, two wrongs don't make a right. Or you would strike out and then you would come back to the dugout and throw your helmet down in frustration. And again, she would say, two wrongs don't make a right. The idea was to help you realize that just because you made an original mistake, you can compose yourself and do the next right thing. Basically, just not to let what you do wrong rattle you into doing something else wrong or something even worse. This is something I see so much with people who struggle with food because they'll make what they perceive as a mistake, which honestly, a lot of times it's not even a mistake. It's eating something maybe they think they should not have eaten, but in their mind, it's a mistake. And then they get upset. Their brain automatically produces thoughts like you've already blown it. You might as well eat everything in sight. You might as well binge. And in this moment, those thoughts can seem appealing and those thoughts can make sense. Now, these thoughts that tell you you might as well binge in any situation are part of the urge. And that's what I'm trying to help you do in the Brain Over Binge approach, is learning to recognize these urges and dismiss them. And the thought of, I've already done something wrong, so it means I should do something even more wrong, as in binge, that's one of the biggest thoughts that leads to binging. And if you can learn to recognize this thought and dismiss it, you're well on your way to being binge-free. I want to suggest that in moments when you have this thought, try telling yourself, two wrongs don't make a right. Try to remember that you'll be so much better off if you can stop after that original thing that you think you did wrong, because that original wrong is not going to have such far-reaching consequences. When you binge, it affects every part of your life. You often lose hours and days recovering from the physical effects and the mental and the emotional effects. Bringing it back to the softball example, yes, missing a catch is not a great thing. It may allow a run to score, but if you pick it up and make a bad throw, it might allow another run to score, or it might contribute to you losing the game. Now, I will say that in the softball example, the player is not consciously thinking, I already missed the catch, so I might as well pick this ball up and make a bad throw. Whereas in binge eaters, a lot of time that thought is going through their mind. However, some of the same factors are at play here. So if you make a mistake like missing a catch, you're going to feel flustered. You're going to feel like you've failed. You're going to feel some uncomfortable emotions welling up inside of you. And what that does is that puts you in a less rational state so that making a mistake after the original mistake becomes more likely. When we're upset and flustered, we're just not thinking as clearly to do that next right thing. So what my coach was trying to teach us was that you have to compose yourself in that moment, even if it's just in a split second, to realize, okay, I'm flustered, I made a mistake, I failed, but I need to pull it together and execute this next move correctly. And that's not easy, and it often takes practice. So with binging, it's not just that you have this thought saying you already failed, so you might as well binge. You have a lot of these feelings that go along with that. You have the feeling of failure. You have the feeling of, oh, I'll never be able to do this right. You have some frustration and self-criticism and anxiety. So when your brain suggests to binge in those moments, it can seem even more appealing because you temporarily make that all go away. And as anyone who's listening to this podcast who struggles with binging knows, it doesn't make it go away. It just makes everything worse. And after the binge, you wish you would have just stopped after the original eating mistake. And because we're never going to eliminate eating mistakes, the key is to get yourself to contain those mistakes and not let the brain convince you that a binge makes sense at that time. This means you're not only going to have to dismiss that thought that says you already messed up, so you might as well binge, you're also going to need to write out all of the frustration or the emotions you have surrounding the original mistake. And for help with this, I definitely suggest listening to the podcast that Coach Julie and I did right before this one. It was episode 142, and it was called Allowing What Is. To illustrate this, I'm going to bring it back to softball one more time. And as a side note, I absolutely love this sport. It was definitely my favorite sport growing up. And sadly, those of you who read Brain Over Binge know that the eating issues really ruined it for me. I was a pitcher, and when I lost a lot of weight, I just could no longer pitch effectively. It was definitely one of the many things my eating disorder took from me. But getting back to the example, I mentioned earlier that my coach would say 2 wrongs don't make a right if a player would strike out and then throw their helmet. So, true story, I definitely did that once in a really important playoff game. I struck out. I was so upset. I came back to the dugout. I just threw my helmet against the dugout wall. And understandably, my coach was very upset with me. I mean, she wanted us to show much better sportsmanship than that. In the moment, of course, I needed to dismiss that desire to act out by throwing my helmet. Just like with binge eating, you need to make that behavior just not an option. You have to develop the mindset that you're just not going to do something that harmful to yourself, regardless of the situation. But in order to do that, it's helpful to have an understanding of what is going to happen in your body and brain after you make that original mistake. You have to know that that's the way your body is going to react. There is going to be frustration. You are going to be upset with yourself. And it's about letting that pass and having that discomfort, again, without going on to do that second wrong, the binge or throwing the helmet. That's going to make everything worse in the long run. I really hope that gives you something to think about as far as not letting any eating imperfections turn into huge problems because you're following those eating imperfections with binging. And the podcast that I mentioned, episode 142, Allowing What Is, that can also help you with this, is linked in the show description. The next expression I want to talk about is the grass is greener on the other side. And this is an extremely common expression that's really a natural tendency that we all have to think things are going to be better at another time or in another place or when something changes. We have trouble kind of being content with where we are now. We're always looking forward to something better or that we think is going to be better. It's also common to look at the past and think that things were better back then and to have sort of a selective memory and only remember the good instead of all the problems that you had during that time. And that's the first way I want to address this grass is greener mentality, because I think a lot of times it comes up with people surrounding a weight that they used to be that was unrealistic. And they think, oh, life was so much better back then when I lost this weight. And it was a weight that was really unsustainable for them, and that ultimately led to an eating disorder. You may experience this if you see an old picture of yourself from a weight that you think is more ideal for you than the weight you are now. You may forget how you constantly had to fight against your body to try to get it to eat less than it needed. You may forget how that made your appetite increase exponentially, and then ultimately eating way more food than you ever could have imagined. It's easy to think, oh, the grass was greener then, and when I was at that lower weight, I had it all together, when if you really think about it, you absolutely did not. Everything in your biology was trying to convince you to eat. And you can never get back there without the same consequences. You just can't fight your body's natural weight. I know I definitely struggled with this. When I was at the highest weight that I ever was, I hung a picture of myself at a lower weight in my room to try to motivate me, but all it did was make me feel worse day after day. And the reality was that being at that weight that was too low for my body is what ultimately made me gain weight so that I was over and above my natural weight. I needed to learn to look at all of this realistically instead of with this grass is greener mentality. So if you find yourself doing the same thing, have compassion for yourself, know that it's normal, but understand that your brain is not telling you the truth here. There are a couple other ways that the grass is greener mentality shows up, and one of them is when you think that it will be easier to recover at another time. This is something I've actually addressed on the podcast before in episode 15, which is titled Readiness for Recovery from Binging. And in that episode, I talked about how, yes, there may sometimes be things that you feel like you need to sort out. However, the brain will always encourage you to put off recovery until a later time. It will always tell you, oh, just binge now, and then the grass will be greener next week or next month or next year. So I encourage you to listen to that episode, which is linked in the description if you're someone who struggles with this. And then also just be aware of this mentality and don't allow your brain to convince you to put off recovery indefinitely. The last way I want to talk about this grass is greener mentality is in relation to the realities of recovery itself. Those of you who have listened to the podcast for a while or have read my books know that I don't believe that recovery suddenly solves all your problems or makes your life great in so many ways or eliminates problematic emotions or feelings or difficult circumstances. Recovery does not involve this major self-transformation. You're still going to just be you, but without this horrible, painful struggle with binging. Recovery will absolutely bring you many benefits, like the grass is actually greener after you stop binging. However, you can't expect it to be perfect. To continue the analogy, you can't expect it to be this perfectly manicured lawn with absolutely no weeds. Life is still going to have problems. It's still going to have pain. It is still going to have difficult emotions. And it's important to have this realistic expectation because if you don't, if you think that you'll be a fundamentally different person, if you think that life is going to be easy afterward, then your brain can do this flip where it tells you the grass was greener back when you were binging. But we all know that it is not. Binging always makes everything worse. The grass is never greener when you're binging. It always negatively affects your life and your relationships and your physical, mental, and emotional health. So just be aware of this grass is greener mentality. It may come up a lot for you. You may have some different ways that it affects you, but I hope that this gave you some useful ideas and insights. If you need extra help and guidance and motivation as you end this habit and as you put binge eating behind you, you can join the highly supportive Brain Over Binge group, and that's led by Brain Over Binge coach Julie. There's a forum for daily support and coaching, and there are weekly group calls every Sunday at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And this year, I'm also doing Q&A calls with the group every third Thursday from 2 p.m. until 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and the next Q&A call with me is on February 15th. You can learn more at brainoverbinge.com/group. You can also find links to learn more about additional Brain Over Binge resources like one-on-one coaching, my books, and my online course in the show description. Thank you so much for being here today. I applaud your commitment to recovery, and I want to encourage you and remind you that you have the power to change your brain and live a binge-free life. The Brain Over Binge podcast is produced and recorded by Brain Over Binge Recovery Coaching, LLC. All work is copyrighted by Brain Over Binge Recovery Coaching, LLC, and all rights are reserved. As a disclaimer, the hosts of the Brain Over Binge podcast are not professional counselors or licensed healthcare providers, and this podcast is not a substitute for medical advice or any form of professional therapy. Eating disorders can have serious health consequences, and you are strongly advised to seek medical attention for matters relating to your health. Please get help when you need it, and good luck on your journey. Need more help? You can find all of our current and upcoming options for support at brainoverbinge.com.